Hi, everybody, and welcome to Sip Streamline, where we discuss how to optimize and streamline your processes for your organization through technology. Today, we'll be exploring the world of Microsoft Syntex. And before we do that, I'd love to get into our sip of the day. Mine today is a cranberry and lime polar seltzer, followed by a green straw, just, for a little Friday flair. What about yourself, Pat?
I am enjoying a nice cherry Coke on this day, one of my favorites.
Awesome. Cherry Coke is a classic. All right, getting into it.
Yeah, so Isabella, when we think about Microsoft Syntex, some of our listeners and viewers may not be familiar with what Syntex is. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of what Syntex is?
Yeah, so Microsoft Syntex is part of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. What it does is it leverages AI to read and understand and categorize documents. Essentially, it can automate the extraction of information from documents, which can be incredibly valuable for a lot of companies and organizations dealing with high volume or large volumes of data. So it does use machine learning models that are created and trained by humans and end users or IT professionals at the organization to identify and tag content. This makes it a lot easier to search, manage, and analyze large volumes of information.
When I hear that, I think of just the large amount of data that it can help automate for it. But what are some of the core benefits? As we take a look at using Syntex in an organization, how could an organization benefit from its use?
Yeah, I think, overarching, the biggest thing is it saves a lot of time. Instead of manually sifting through documents to find specific information, Syntex can do that in a fraction of the time. Of course, it's not instantaneous, but as time passes, those models will start to understand exactly what type of documents you need to pull information from, as well as the actual information you are extracting. With that, I think that Syntex is also great for a multitude of different features that it has. I think the key ones, though, for me that I have seen is number one is document processing. Like I mentioned before, just identifying, classifying, and extracting that information. Things like contracts, invoices, and other important documents are incredibly important to a lot of organizations. With that, I think another thing is content assembly. Really being able to standardize business documents like contracts and agreements, but kind of removing that repetition from it and creating templates surrounding it. So really streamlining that as well.
So on that content assembly piece of it, are you saying that we may change the way that PowerPoint templates are used and Word templates are used, where I can maybe give it a prompt or potentially fill out a form and it goes and builds that document for me and I don't have to start with a blank template to fill all the gaps in?
Yep, that's exactly what I'm saying. Content assembly does remove that repetition and allows you to create those standard business documents over time instead of manually doing so. So also something that is included in here is the e-signature integration, which I think a lot of companies and organizations will find very useful. That e-signature lives within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, so no need for another third-party software that allows for e-signatures. You can do it right there, send, review, and sign those documents. Optical character recognition is another feature of Syntex, which allows you to extract text from images and scan documents, as well as handwritten notes. So this is very useful that we've seen with a lot of our life sciences organizations, because there are a lot of people in labs, using handwritten notes. Being able to kind of transfer that into a digital space is very appealing to them. And then lastly, I think another big one is document translation, which is great for global businesses, for communication across different languages and cultures to understand. I think that is imperative for scalability within their organization as well.
Yeah, when I look at, and I hear some of those specifically, the one that really resonates with me is the e-signature integration. I think a lot of organizations use DocuSign, Adobe Sign, and a bunch of others, I should say. And so with that, if it can all be integrated with the Microsoft side, how does that work with the documents? Is that with inside of Power Automate that you could trigger those? Or can someone manually go and trigger, a signature like they may do today?
Yep. So you can just go right into the document itself, assign a signature to it. You can send that out to a specific person. So you can actually input, Pat Peterson, and it would then send that via Outlook to that person to go ahead and sign. So it does use that factor of automation within there. But basically, if you're actually in a document library doing this e-signature process, a right side panel would appear and start that automation process for you to be able to input all the features you need for that signature to take place.
That's neat. The other one that you mentioned you started with is one that I think I resonate with. When I fill out an expense report, I take a picture of the receipt. That receipt obviously goes to the processing overall. When you think about some real world examples, besides maybe just the simple point and click of a receipt or that image translation that may happen, what are some other examples, that might be beneficial from a document processing perspective?
Yeah, I think the biggest ones that we have seen are contracts and agreements in that realm. So things like law firms have a lot of different contracts and agreements that they generate and need processing from. But being able to kind of translate a certain process from someone working in an Excel document, manually filling out each cell, versus kind of training this model to be able to do this automatically really does make an impact on how quickly this business can operate and prosper in that sense when it comes to having new contracts and having, new agreements being signed at a lot quicker rate.
Mm-hmm. And even just from a tracking perspective, you mentioned like using an Excel file to track, items or, fill out a expense report or whatever it may be. Being able to extract that information out and then using Power Automate to then plug it into, a SharePoint list or even back into that Excel file, I guess technically you could, although I'm not sure we need to continue to grow the use of Excel, but you certainly could. And I think that's the value here is it takes the human input out. It's probably, we laugh about some of these, and I think we're going to get into that a little bit later on images, but we laugh about how maybe inaccurate AI can be, but it's definitely more consistent than humans are. So humans make mistakes, AI makes mistakes. From a consistency perspective, the ability to train that from a model and say that this is a invoice, and you look for the dates, look for the invoice number, look for the address. That's very consistent, and the models know where to look on the different pages. So
I think too, on that point, we hear a lot about AI and all the different types of AI in the media, and that can be very overwhelming for organizations or smaller business to even consider. So something like this at a smaller scale, potentially some type of pilot program, allows you to kind of understand that value of what could be possible, integrating AI in some of these processes. But on that same note, it's also important that we recognize that the human input is also very important with AI specifically, and being able to prompt and train these models to exactly or tailoring to your needs or your organization's needs is what makes AI the most effective it could be.
Yeah, completely. I think AI gets scary, and if you can take one process at a time and crawl through that process, it's much easier to utilize it. So how would an organization really get started? What would be the steps for an organization to start to use Syntex?
Yeah, so I think the first and most important step in getting involved in Syntex is first assessing your current document management process and just your approach overall. This can help you to identify areas where automation could be beneficial. So we just kind of talked about some type of pilot program, something like that, where you're able to kind of assess the specific groups or subfunctions within your organization that could benefit highly from something like Microsoft Syntex. I think with that, Microsoft has a ton of resources that you can obviously explore from a training perspective, which kind of brings me to my next point about how important the training process of Microsoft Syntex, especially when rolling it out or considering it, understanding how you can properly train these models to tailor it to your needs. That is the, first and most important part of considering Syntex as a whole.
Yeah, and I think, when we think about training, this is not end user training, although that's an element of it in terms of how to use the tool. But you're really talking about document training, actually making sure the results are what you want them to be, and if not, adjusting and tweaking the models, right?
Exactly. And I also think when approaching something like AI, it's almost comes through practice, right? Just understanding how the tool operates, how it works for you, how you like to input certain items, or what information you particularly like to extract. Just being able to play around with it before it's, completely public to your organization is also a very important part.
Yeah, and I think this has been good to talk about those steps. What are some of the challenges or considerations that you would see, organizations? I think about the unknown of what that AI is going to bring might be one, and maybe the idea of the data may not be clean enough or structured enough, right? If you look at you mentioned handwritten notes, for it, or even some invoices, right? Even if you look at different states, some of their documents are different. What are some other challenges and considerations to consider? It's not something that you just pick up and do and have 100% success tomorrow, but what are some things to think about?
Yeah, I think the biggest one you mentioned, and it kind of goes alongside the training component, is like a change management approach to this, since this is completely new, and especially if it is introducing you into the world of AI, making sure your organization is ready, prepared. There's a lot of communication surrounding it, and there's a lot of handholding in that aspect, right? There's support. And that'll make it feel, less scary when their processes are changed in that realm. I think something that you had mentioned that we'll laugh at in a second is there are some features that are in further development. There are, AI is constantly changing, constantly growing, and adapting to new environments. And I think the one that we've seen the most is the image tagging. So, for example, with image tagging, if I were to put a picture of yourself and I in a library that has image tagging enabled in SharePoint, it can get very literal. So what I mean by that is it can say tooth, for instance. It can say hair. It can say grass if you're sitting on grass. It can say wall if you're, seated in front of a wall. Some of these kind of tags aren't very useful when we're actually thinking about it. So again, it could be a little bit literal, and I hope to see that more developed in the future, but it is definitely comical to look at now, and see what it could be.
But that's only with, images. When you think about headshots specifically, right, it's going to try and capture that information out. It doesn't go and know who that person is. It's trying to identify the shade of color, the outfit they're wearing. I even see it say the haircut style, which arguably is a little questionable, depending if that person actually wants that haircut style.
Right.
But even when you've done it with pets and animals before, that's been some crazy ones where it gets the breed correct on one, and then the next one it's like dog. That doesn't help me. So yeah, so we'll pop some examples on the screen here, and we have already, but make sure everyone can see that and laugh around a little bit, because that's one of the funny parts of it. But I think image creation on the flip side in AI is also equally funny, with pictures of, no hands or extra fingers or, additional arms as well. So I think images in AI are not quite there yet.
Yeah, and I also think, it's something to laugh at. We just talked about how AI is so scary to a lot of organizations and a lot of people in general. And, there's so much information surrounding it, so many different types, like I mentioned. So being able to laugh at it, being able to play around with it is, part of the aspect of Syntex that can be very exciting and new to an organization. So Another kind of issue I have seen, and a point of frustration, I should say, not an issue, is that it's not instantaneous in terms of the actual information that's being extracted. So it can be a bit delayed in terms of when the model is actually able to extract that information for you. So I've seen it take 30 minutes. I've seen it take 5 minutes. I've seen it take up to 24 hours to actually populate. So I think being aware of that certain aspect of it before jumping into syntax, and again, this comes with training and in the change management information surrounding the tool, will be very useful for people to understand and know.
And the one other item I'll just add to it as well is I think you covered the use of syntax. If an organization doesn't have a governance plan and a plan around how to use SharePoint, that's probably your first spot, because keep in mind that these documents are stored in SharePoint. So, I mean, ultimately, Copilot can find those. We should try to say Copilot on every single one of these, just so we can, keep the Copilot word alive. But ultimately, when we think about it, I think that's one other element. But oftentimes, these types of processes are so isolated to a few people or to a smaller subset of users. And so you can actually keep that a little bit more contained with permissions as well. So with this, Isabella, as I take a look, this has been really insightful for me. I know I've had some hands-on experience seeing syntax. You have certainly designed and built solutions around it. So it sounds like a great, powerful tool for organizations to use to help streamline that process of maybe taking paper and making it digital. But it doesn't actually have to be a physical piece of paper either. It can be a PDF document that's emailed. It could, look at an email inbox and obviously pull that information out. So as we close out today, any, closing thoughts that you have?
No, I think this was a great kind of discussion surrounding it, and I appreciate people getting to understand or be open to the idea of AI within their organization. And again, I know it can be scary, but I think as we look towards the future, Microsoft is consistently making updates in the realm of AI. I know we're used to it, seeing the constant updates and learning some more every day. But I think with Syntex specifically, I've seen updates, over the past couple months where, they add some sensitivity labels aspect to it. So there's a point of classification of documents from a sensitivity standpoint. So that'll open up a lot of different doors for many organizations to, feel more secure in the idea of this potentially being a solution for them. But other than that, I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, I think the sensitivity labels with DLP and some of those components will be huge to help control data loss inside of an organization. So thank you. This has been insightful. Thankful to all of you for joining and listening. Obviously, as we have enjoyed the conversation on Syntex today, be sure to join us in future conversations on Sip and Streamline. But until then, sip away. Cheers.
Cheers.